Okay, okay, Chevra. Um, I was looking at the table of contents yesterday, and I came to the realization that we're actually going to be finished with this Sefer soon. We have one more chapter after this, so it's quite exciting. So in the next few months, we'll be finished with the Sefer, and then we'll have to think about what we're going to learn next. So we will deal with that. Okay. So what we were learning yesterday is that only when it comes to the payback of debts, let's see, where were we? Let's see. Okay, we were in Sif Chaf. So we had learned yesterday that loans that are made with cash have to be paid back with cash, and therefore there's an obligation to liquidate the mashkon if that's what the malva requests, and in order to be able to get cash, since he gave cash, he's entitled to get cash back. But when it comes to other debts, let's say debts that are a result of damage, or debts that are a result of theft, and so forth, if the debtor does not have cash, he's allowed to pay back with metaltalin. He's allowed to pay back even with cheap, like we said, bran was the example that the Gemara gives. But there's only one other case where a debtor has to pay back in cash other than loans, and that is levad schiras po'alim. When it comes to paying wages of an employee, someone that you hired to work for you is entitled to get paid in cash, because that's the expectation, that's the implicit contract that you make with an employee, that he wants to get paid back in cash. So the two cases where you always must pay back in cash is when there was a loan made in cash, the payback has to be in cash. When you hire someone as an employee, you're obligated to pay them in cash. And then the last line that we saw was va'afilu lomar lo tul masha asisa bischarcha eno rishai. Even to say to the employee, you can take the merchandise that you were working with as payment, that you're also not allowed to do. He can say, no, I don't want to take these widgets that I've been working on the entire week. I want to take cash, and he's entitled to that in Beis Din. So on that, the Imrei had said, and we're up to Bischaracha. He says only when it comes to straw and hay, debtor cannot say, to his employee that he owes money to, he cannot say, take this commodity. Avol b'midi da'achila. So for widgets and other things that are non-edibles, there are some opinions that say that's the only limitation, that you cannot give him payment with non-edible items. But with edible items, kagon chita musarim rashai. Let's say a guy works on a farm and he's helping to manufacture wheat and barley. So then you could pay him back with wheat and barley. Ubifrat im nosin lo pas afui sharoi kfar la'achila. And that's certainly true if it's a ready-to-eat item like bread, then you surely would be allowed to pay him back with that ready-to-eat item. And the argument goes like this. When a person works, he's working to put bread on his table. So by you giving him a non-edible commodity, you are forcing him to go to the extra burden of having to take time from work to find out a way to liquidate this into food. Okay? But if you're giving him food as payment, then you're perfectly within your rights because you're giving him what he's working for, which is to put bread on his table. So that's the argument as to why, even though the Rav Shulchan Aruch had said that you cannot pay a person with non-cash, cash equivalents, employee, but the exception is that the cash equivalent is food. That you must always pay an employee with cash, even if the non-cash is edible. Because when he contracted to work for you, it was with the understanding that he'd be working for cash. And that's how we paskin. He says, but that's only true if the hiring of the employee was directly between the employer and the employee. But let's say a foreman hires the employee. It's not the owner of the business, but a foreman hires him and basically says, you'll negotiate with the boss how much, or what the terms of payment are. So there, since there was never any direct interaction with the employer, some say that the employer can exploit that to his advantage and not pay him with cash, but cash equivalents. But there are those who disagree with that as well. Okay, so bottom line is, though, that we generally paskin that an employee must be paid back with cash. If that's what he wants, he has every right to say, I will not accept anything other than cash. Okay.
So you see, from I worked for the public accounting firm, would pay a lunch allowance if you worked on a weekend day. So, and it was significant. Even then, it was like $20 or something like that for the lunch allowance. So the partner decided he's going to come and visit us and he'd bring lunch for us, and then we would be able to claim the allowance. And the lunch cost him like $5. So he was being cheap and saved himself money by paying us the allowance. So the allowance was for food, but we didn't get the allowance, we got the food instead. It's not quite the same, but it just reminded me of that.
Interesting. Well, was he the one who set the food allowance in the first place?
Well, it was a big firm, so the firm set it.
The firm set the allowance, and he just wanted to save the firm money.
Correct.
So he was a partner in the firm?
Right.
Okay, I guess that's within his rights.
Is it? I guess.
I mean, was it in your work contract that you were given this allowance? And certainly, if a person claimed that he was kosher and couldn't eat the food, he would be allowed to probably revert back to the food allowance. Yeah. All right. Interesting. Yeah, it's not really. Yeah, that's right. It's not, but it's not really our. But it's not really our case over here.
No, not exactly.
Right.
The money was
But I do know of situations. I mean, I think my father-in-law had a situation where a client couldn't pay him for his CPA services, and because his business went bankrupt, and so he just told my father-in-law he was a furrier, and so that's how my mother-in-law got a fur coat, because and it happens sometimes that. But what we're seeing is that al pi halacha, a person who works for you, it provides you with work product, you have to pay him with cash. If you go mechula, if you go belly up, and the only asset that you have left is your merchandise, technically, the employee could say, liquidate the merchandise yourself and give me cash. If you want to be a nice guy, obviously, and you know that your chances are that or
you may get more sense on the dollar by taking the time.
You may get more sense on the dollar, and also the person that you're dealing with may not be a halachic observant Jew, and therefore he'll basically say to you, sorry, this is all I can give you, right? But it is important to know that your obligation as an employer is that you have to pay with cash. You can't say, I'm sorry, I'm short on cash. I'm going to have to offer you merchandise instead. That's not an option according to halacha. Okay.
Desperate for hiring new people because it's really taken off, and maybe it's with all the new cultures and immigration that's coming to the country, but there's people who are showing up who are very qualified people who will not work unless they pay cash. In other words, they don't want to be
under the table.
Yeah, that's how they want to work, and it's very frustrating, about something like this, and it's the only way that they'll do it. And I guess there's enough people out there that will pay that way because there's a real labor shortage right now.
Wow.
And, it's difficult.
Wow.
So qualified people, and
they would probably do a great job for you.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it must be a great temptation for a lot of people. What do you do in a situation like that, where the only way, where you're competing against other employers who are willing to pay under the table, and you're not? I suppose, I guess the question would be, this is really something to bring up with a government official, and it might be worthwhile to, let's say, call your member of parliament, like Melissa Lantzman, and say to her, this is what I'm up against. I want to be a law-abiding citizen. It's my religion tells me that I have to be a law-abiding citizen, but this is what I'm up against. I'm up against a workforce that is used to getting cash under the table because 9 out of 10 employers are willing to do that. They're willing to look the other way. So what do you recommend for me? And find out what she says. That's what I would do. Let me know after the shir if you'd like me to set up a meeting.
That's a much better story than my story.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm going another route. What I'm doing is I'm of immigration. A lady who worked, a Jewish lady actually, worked in the government for 25 years and was an immigration consultant for the government, and she's got contacts all around the world. I'm actually going to start looking at bringing people in from other countries.
Wow, and you'll offer them the incentive of helping them.
Well, so what they do is when they come in, they have to be tied to the employer for a minimum of a year or two. They can't work for somebody else. So,
right.
So if I bring them in, it's not like they get into the country, then that's it. They can, just do what they want.
Right.
They don't work for me. Then they kick that. The problem with that that's happening is that there's employers who are doing that, and they're taking advantage of the system and not giving the best conditions or wages to these people are coming in.
Right. Which is also an issue too, right? And it must be, there are a lot of temptations there as well to exploit a worker, which we know you're not allowed to do. Okay, good. Eino Rasha, you're not allowed to pay him with goods, even the goods that he himself was manufacturing. Aval im sachu lishmar lo davar shel hefker, yachol omer lo tulma shasisa bischarecha, lefi sha'adain lo zacha bo balabayis. Here is one exception to that rule. I hire someone to be a security guard over something that doesn't belong to me, that it's hefker, it's ownerless. And I just basically hire a guy to be in charge of making sure that no animals come onto the property, or to to harm the property, or no people come onto the property to try and stake a claim. So if if I'm hiring a person to do that, the goods have not yet been claimed by me that are on this property. I do have a right to say to him, take a certain percentage of the goods that are on this property that don't yet belong to me. V'harei yikablen v'harei hu ki'ilu sachar lasos b'sada shel chaveiro b'yada bo hapoel. So in that situation, it's tantamount to hiring someone to watch someone else's property. And there the employee is fully cognizant, I suppose, of the circumstances, and therefore there is that loophole that when the goods do not belong to me, but they're hefker, I can tell the worker, take some of the hefker for yourself as compensation. It's a little bit bizarre. It's a little bit weird to find a scenario like that, but I guess there is the possibility of something like that coming up. Okay. All right, let us go on to the next halacha. Amal v'la'ani al-mara v'kardon v'chayotze bahem yachol lahaskiram shelo b'rshus ba'alim. That if a person lends money to a poor man and takes the collateral from him of a shovel or a pickaxe or something like that, an instrument that can be used by a worker, in that situation, even though we normally said before that a person may not use the collateral that he takes on a loan, he has to leave it and leave it fallow. But when it comes to lending money to a poor man, surprisingly, you are allowed to lease out the collateral that he gave you without the express permission of the debtor. And essentially, you will be taking compensation from you're basically taking a repayment for the debt from the leasing out of the equipment, right? So he says, because the wages or the rental fee that you're getting for the leasing out of the tool is worth more than the diminution of the value of the tool through wear and tear. And therefore we can assume that the owner of the tool is happy for you to lease these out in order to avoid having this debt loom over him. And it's therefore by leasing it out, even though there might be a small amount of wear and tear on the tool, but the return on the lease is much higher than the loss through the wear and tear, and therefore you're doing him a favor. However, you may not lease out the tool to yourself, which means use it for yourself and then deduct from the principal of the loan, but it can only be leased out to others. To avoid suspicion that you're giving yourself a discount on the rental fee. Even if there's a market value, people may suspect that you gave yourself a discount on the fee, and will therefore say that you've exploited the debtor. But if it's not something that is meant as a work tool, then even though it's something that has value, were it to be leased out to others, you cannot lease it out to others, neither to yourself or to others, unless you get express permission from the owner, who's the debtor. Afilu higia kvar zman hapiraon. That's even if the time for the the debt has matured. In other words, first of all, it seems like you can only lend out the shovel and the hoe, or or the pickaxe, only if the loan has already matured. That's what the implication of this line is saying. But instead, any other commodity cannot be leased out, but rather once the loan is due, remember we said you have to wait 30 days after demanding payment if you have to give the guy a chance to come up with an explanation or a means of coming up with the cash. And then you would go to Beis Din, and the Beis Din would supervise the liquidation of it so that you can collect the payment on the loan. And va'afilu lemashkano eitzel acher asur, shahamashkon hu kipikadon biyad hamalva. And he says, and even to just leave it for safekeeping with another person is asur, because when you leave it for safekeeping with another, it's like you're giving it into the hands of another lender, and that you're not allowed to do.
The value of the tool would be less than the loan. Like, for example, let's say it's a very expensive electric saw.
Right, and the loan was for less than that. Well, whatever you that's the reason why you need a Beis Din to supervise the liquidation, is that they have to make sure that you fetch a fair market value. You would take the amount that you're owed, and then you would give the surplus back to the debtor. Okay, in all instances, whether it's worth more or worth less, it has to be done under the supervision of Beis Din. And whatever is less, you may end up having to go after the guy separately to get the remainder of what is owed to you. But generally speaking, the reason why you take a mashkon is to secure the debt. So therefore, the only way to secure it is by taking something of equal or greater value, not equal or lesser value. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov over here. But you're not allowed to lease it yourself. So comes along the Imrei Yaakov and he says, "The kol shekain sha'asar lo liyishtamish imo b'chinam itneshu kamo ribis." He says, and certainly to use a mashkon, that is a tool, to use it for yourself, that is absolutely usher, because that's like taking interest on a loan. Because if you're not deducting from the principal, right, and you lend the guy $100 and he gives you his saw as security, and then you end up using the saw for free, then you've gotten the benefit of the saw, plus you're going to get $100 back. So you're taking interest on a loan. Right. So even deducting is not permitted out of a concern that you may not be deducting the adequate amount. Shehunena me halova al yedei halvas, because you're benefiting from the lova through the loan. And there's ribis here, different discussion. Sorry, I lost you for a moment. But when it comes to someone that you've loaned money to, you have to be very careful to make sure that you don't get favors from that person during the duration of the debt. Okay. It could be. It could be if the guy wouldn't normally invite you for Shabbos. You loaned the guy money, and normally you don't socialize together with him, but all of a sudden he's become your buddy and he wants to have you over for drinks or for a meal. So then there is a problem of ribis there. Yeah. You have to wait until he pays the debt off and then accept his invitation. Okay. Umikol makom im avar v'hishtamesh imo ein tzarech loses lo scharo b'davar shememela eina omed lahaskira. If, however, the fellow does do you a favor, you don't have to go so far as to say, "Oh, I must pay you for that effort." Okay, because it's not normally something that a person would expect payment for. If he's my neighbor and he helps me trim the hedges, I'm not obligated to say, I must pay you, you must allow me to pay you for that, otherwise it's rivets. Because if it's something that you normally is not quantifiable for cash, like an invitation or something like that, or he happens to be going down to downtown and he offers you a ride, you can, sometimes people would offer to pay for the gas. Let me at least pay for half your gas. So then you should do. But you don't, if he refuses, then it's okay. The Yesh Omrim, dim lo hisnabo b'shas halva rak be'atzmo mishtamish bo chayiv lase schar shimush. There is, however, an opinion that as long as there was no stipulation that that the debtor can do favors for me, and he decides on his own to do a favor for me, then I do have to pay him. And I do have to, I have to pay you for having used your services. There is such an opinion, to make sure that you avoid any question of ribis. So it's a delicate issue, and therefore it's better to avoid, whenever you lend someone money, try to make sure that the normal patterns of behavior between the debtor and the creditor do not change in any kind of noticeable way. Okay. And then lo yaskirenu la'atzmo, you should not lease the tool that he's given you as collateral yourself. The dafka shelo hisna imo, that's provided that there was no stipulation made with the debtor over this. Avolim hisna im halova shari hol v'hu morid mehachov al yedei hayishtamshus. But let's say at the time I lent you the money and I said, I'm going to need some collateral. You said, fine, take my electric saw. And then it would be permitted. And then in the course of discussing the terms of the loan, I say, if you like, I have use for a saw and I can deduct from the loan $10 a week because I'm going to be I'd like to be able to use the saw. Would that be acceptable to you? And if the guy says yes, then you would be allowed to do that. But that's only if even if he gives you permission to use the saw, if he tells you use it for free, I don't mind, I'll pay you back the whole principal. You're not allowed to use it because that would be ribis. The afagav derotza litinlo b'matana mitchilo b'sof the aser k'isa b'yoredeya simin kuf samach, and this is clear in Yoredeya, right, where it discusses the laws of ribis, that giving a person a gift at the outset of the loan by letting him use the collateral for personal use, or even if you want to give him a gift at the end of the loan, when the guy pays you the loan, he says, and here's a bottle of schnapps. I just wanted it in my appreciation. That's absolutely usher. And so when we say that if you negotiate with the debtor that you can lease his equipment, the collateral, that's true whether it was done at the time of the loan, it was stipulated at the time of the loan, or whether it was stipulated after the loan was already extended. In both situations, you do have a right to, with the permission of the debtor, to negotiate with him how you would like to be able to deduct from the loan in exchange for using the equipment that he left for you as collateral. So as long as the two of you negotiate, it's fine. The only thing you're not allowed to do is independently deduct from the loan and use it and deduct every week, because there's a concern that you may not be deducting sufficiently. But as long as you stipulate with him and he's satisfied with that, so then you are allowed to do it. Okay?
So, Rabbi, I'm wondering about the borrowed spouse, because we're saying even once the loan is exhausted, he can't give you that as a gratitude gift or so else. How much after?
Only as at the time of the payment of the loan. But let's say a week after he pays back the loan, he says this is a gift. It's not associated at all with the loan. Okay, we'll hold it here for today. We'll continue the halacha tomorrow.